Well, hello, I'm Doug Apple, back with another special interview for you today. And on the phone line with us is Mr. Mike Sharman. He's the general counsel of Share Healthcare. That's a nonprofit healthcare sharing ministry, which you can find out more about at sharehealthcare.com. But Mike Sharman, good to have you on the phone line with us. What are we going to talk about today?
Well, Doug, I thought we would talk about you today and your 40th anniversary in Christian radio. I don't know if your listeners know that, but it's 40 years in Christian radio. You know, if you'd been in, let's say you'd been in the Army, you would have retired at 20 years. Then you could have gotten a new job in law enforcement and retired after another 20. So you'd have 2 retirements racked up by now. But, you know, your audience hears your voice all the time. And they hear your voice in their personal areas, you know, at home, in that, you know, behind their front door, at their home as they're just going about their work and listening. And then they hear about you in their car as they're driving to and fro work or taking the kids here and there. And you know about the intimacy of radio. And to you, to your listeners, you've really become a part of their family, or at least a part of their close circle. So I thought it'd be kind of interesting for them to hear about how you've been spending the last 40 years. So what do you think? You up for being interviewed?
Yeah, I'm game.
All right. Well, so how did you get involved in Christian radio in the first place?
Well, how I got in radio at all is an interesting story. So I went to college. I was going to be a sports writer. I loved sports. And somewhere early in my college career, it just lost its luster. Actually, from the bigger picture, I can see that God was probably working on my heart. But I remember standing on the football sideline one day taking pictures for the school newspaper and the yearbook, and trying to get in just the exact position to get a great football catch, you know, the touchdown catch with the ball in the air and the receiver's face in the lens. And it lost its luster. I was thinking there's always going to be another game-winning catch. There's always going to be another buzzer-beater shot. There's always going to be another walk-off home run. I was thinking it'll be Super Bowl 20, then Super Bowl 30, and Super Bowl 50, and Super Bowl 500 someday. At what point does it just not even matter? So I kind of lost my interest in being a sports reporter, but then what would I do? And I thought about politics, and then I kind of thought, politics is kind of like sports in a way. And I thought about economics, and I took a couple economics classes, and I really liked it, but didn't know what I would do with it. I ended up getting a minor in public relations, but I never changed my major from journalism. But then one day I was in my dorm, and I came up from lunch, and usually I was with friends, but I was alone on this day. And there was a guy who had a room. He had no roommate. He had a room right at the stairwell. So as soon as you stepped out onto the floor, there was his room. And most guys kept their doors shut, but he always had his open. And he was always in there working on something. Well, since I was alone and had the time that day, I stepped into his room and I said, "What are you doing?" And he said he was building a computer. So this is back in the 1980s. So this is, probably the same time Bill Gates and Steve Jobs were getting their start. Here he was building his own computer in his dorm room. So I got to know him a little bit, and he was kind of a quirky guy, but it turned out he was also the engineer of the campus radio station. He did all the wiring and such at that radio station, and he said, "You ought to be a radio DJ." And he finally talked me into doing a show, so I did a Friday morning show on the campus radio station for a while. That was my introduction. Of course, it was terrible, but it made me interested enough to take one radio class. So I took one radio class. In the course of that radio class, the local town radio station manager came in to the class and said that he had a job opening if anybody in the class would like to apply. I thought, well, that sounds interesting. So I applied and I got the job. And it's kind of funny because I went back and told my teacher, yeah, I took that guy's job. And the teacher said, that's a terrible job. You shouldn't have taken that job. I said, well, it's too late. I've got the job. So that's how I got into radio. And I was working there in Charleston, Illinois, at the town radio station. They had a country AM station and a pop rock FM station there for the college town in the 80s. And the same thing sort of happened. I had this dissatisfaction growing within me of playing secular music. I was helping run the automation system and computers at first, and then they put me on the air as the evening DJ on the pop rock station for the college students. And I did that for a little while. In fact, I remember I ran into two girls at the grocery store from the church youth group, and they were saying, oh, we've been listening to your show on the radio and we love it. And I remember telling them, you shouldn't be listening to that show. That's secular music. That's garbage. You should stop listening to that. And of course, there I was the one playing it. But it was this growing conviction in me that, like, if I could do this job full time for the Lord, then I should do this job full time for the Lord. And so after I kind of came to that conclusion, I applied for some other Christian radio jobs in the state of Illinois. And I thought, oh, yeah, God's going to make this door fly open for me. And he didn't. And I really didn't understand it because I thought, well, God, I thought this is what you wanted me to do. Why wouldn't you just open the door? And but what I can look back on now and see that I was learning to be a strong Christian in a secular workplace. And that has its own challenges. And for example, I remember the day one of the sales ladies, this is back when you could still smoke in the radio station, and she was kind of a battle-hardened sales lady, and she came up to me and she was smoking her cigarette, and she said, Doug, I need you to put your voice on these Busch beer ads. And I paused for a second and I said, well, I am not going to do that. I'm not going to lend my voice to selling alcohol. And she kind of coughed and sputtered while she was smoking. And she was like, no, you need to leave your religion at home. I said, well, that's exactly what I'm not going to do. And so through situations like that, people still respected me there because I did work hard. I went the extra mile, but there was this very limited slice of things that I wouldn't do, like alcohol commercials. We aired the St. Louis Cardinal baseball games there, so Busch beer was one of their main things, but I wasn't going to add my voice to them. So anyway, eventually I did. In fact, what I did was, now this is going to sound kind of crazy to some people, but it's my story. That's all I can say. We were going to get married, my wife and I. She had one more year of college, and then she graduated. So in June of 1986, on June 7th, 1986, 40 years ago, we were going to get married. We did get married. About 6 weeks before that, I really felt like God was telling me to turn in my notice at that radio station. And I did not have another job. And I don't recommend that anybody do this, but it is what I felt like God was leading me to do. And so I did. I went and told him, I said, well, I'm going to have to resign. I'd been working there a year. I said, I'm going to give you a 6 weeks notice. And they said, well, it's probably about the money. We'll give you a raise. I said, well, it's nothing to do with the money. I feel like this is what God wants me to do. So this is what I'm going to do. Meanwhile, I sent out resumes to all the Christian radio stations in Illinois, and there weren't that many then. There are a lot more now. But I just prayed, God, just open one door. Because if more than one door opens, how am I going to know which one to choose? If two people offer me a job, and then, yes, I could take the one that pays the most, or I could pay the one with the most upward mobility, or the one in the biggest city. Well, I don't want to do that if that's not your best plan for me. So, but if you open just one door, then that's the one I'll take, and I won't have to wonder about it. And so that is what happened. So one door did open, and I took the job at a radio station. The call letter's WXAM. I took a job at that radio station in a smaller town. And our honeymoon We didn't go on some trip or cruise. Our honeymoon was spent moving. And so we moved to a town where we didn't know a soul. And I started in Christian radio, and it was 40 years ago. And so it was June. Now I forgot the day. What was it? The 15th or 16th or something like that. Anyway, so that was 40 years ago. And so I've been working full-time in Christian radio now for 40 years.
So you must have had a very strong Christian fiance, then become wife also to be, she's doing her bridal showers and all that while you put in your notice and don't yet have a job.
Yeah, and you know what? She never said a word about it. I look back now and I think that was kind of crazy because, yeah, a wife-to-be would certainly be concerned and worried, but I don't know that she necessarily had all that much faith in God. She did have a lot of faith in God, but I don't think that was the cornerstone of her faith. I think she just had her faith in me that, well, he'll take care of it. I don't know if this thing that he's thinking is going to happen will happen, but either way, he's a worker. He'll get a job. It'll be fine. I think was primarily what she was thinking.
Wonderful. Now, did I have the call letters right? WXAM?
N, like Christian. That's where it came from. WXAN, sort of like Christian.
Right. Okay, I got it. Well, then, tell me about the type of station that was then. Was it one that did Christian top 40? Was it a talk show type of Christian station? What was it?
Oh, well, it was a very interesting station. Now, Christian radio is a lot different animal today than it was back then.
Yeah, you're mentioning how few stations there were in Illinois at the time. I remember in that same era, there was one AM station in Warrenton, which is a town about 40 miles south of D.C., and then there was one in Fairfax, and that was basically it. And they were both AM stations.
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah, Christian radio was not a big deal.
No, I remember when I lived in Charleston trying to tune in a radio station out of Champaign, Illinois, and the kind where you have to hold your breath and put a hanger in the top of your radio and try to do anything just to hear it in a scratchy manner. So WXAN, it was a pretty new station. It had been started only a couple years before by a man whose name was Harold Lauder. He's since passed away. He was born in 1928. And he and his dad worked on the Mississippi River and had made some money when they had built a coal terminal to load Southern Illinois coal onto barges in the Mississippi River. They were kind of a middleman, so they made a lot of money. So he had money sitting there, and he was praying to God, what do you want me to do? And he was reading a publication called The Sword of the Lord, which is a Christian newspaper at the time, and he saw an ad that said, would you like to start a Christian radio station? And he just felt like that was God saying to him, from inside of him, yes, that's exactly what I want to do. And so he knew what his mission was. So he set out to build the station. And here's a funny thing. So he got a hold of his pastor, the Baptist minister in Murfreesboro, Illinois, and said, hey, I'm real busy here working, but can you help me build this Christian radio station? Can you get a hold of the people in this ad in this paper, which was like an engineering firm? Can you get a hold of these people and find out what it takes to start a Christian radio station? So a few weeks later, he got back with his pastor and he said, well, what did you find out? And the pastor said, well, they didn't return my call, so I took that as a sign.
Oh, my.
And so the boss said, basically, look, I've already got my sign. I'm doing it. Nothing's going to get in my way. So let's get this done. So anyway, but he didn't know anything about radio. So he started a radio station with a box of his personal records. And his personal records included like gospel hymns by Elvis and some Willie Nelson Christian songs and, Back in those days, you had Twyla Paris and David Meese and the Bill Gaither Trio. And so this was all he had was these records. So then you have to start trying to get in the good graces of the record companies back then. And there was no internet. So the record companies, either you go to a record store and buy all your records, which that's expensive, or you have the record companies send you their records so that you can play them on the radio. So that became my job. I became the music director, and it became my job to get the music into the radio station. And we also played national programs like Warren Wiersbe Back to the Bible and James Dobson Focus on the Family. We had a satellite dish, and we had a live show called Point of View with Marlon Maddox.
Oh, yeah. I was on that once long time ago.
Yeah, that was a long time ago. So those are the good old days. In fact, I remember they had call screeners, but every once in a while, this guy would get through by lying to the call screener. And then as soon as he got on the air, because Reagan was the president, and he would just shout out for the listeners to hear, Reagan is the Antichrist. Ronald Wilson Reagan, 6 letters, 6 letters, 6 letters. And then they'd hang up on him, and Marlon Maddox would be like, why'd you let that guy through again?
So tell me about the difference of technology from 40 years ago to today.
Well, of course, it was pre-internet. It was you had personal computers, but they were very expensive. At that first radio station, we did some accounting and payroll on a computer. So it was back when you had a floppy disk, a DOS-based operating system. I remember when I started doing payroll for the station, the boss he'd get on me about, you've got to make sure to discharge the static electricity from your body before you touch the floppy disk, or you could erase all the data.
My goodness.
So that was a different time and era. We played programs on reel to reel. You'd get Focus on the Family, for example, was reel to reel and then cassette. In fact, I just heard from a guy who I ran into at a laundromat in Murfreesboro, Illinois. When we were first married, I was working in the evenings and my wife worked during the day, and I wasn't real happy with the local laundromat, so I did all the laundry. So for the first several months of our marriage, I did all the laundry. So I remember being there one day, and some young man came in there, and I thought, well, I kind of want to be a witness to this guy. Found out later he was thinking, I want to be a witness to this guy.
Oh, good.
So we found out we were mutual Christians, but he didn't know a lot about Christian music. And back then, we aired a weekly show called The Pat Boone Show. And Pat Boone hosted a contemporary Christian music show, and they sent it to you every week on record albums. And I had those kind of stacked up, and I told this guy, his name was Michael, I said, Michael, well, here, I'll give you these albums, and it will help introduce you to Christian music. And he brought that up to me recently. Remember when you gave me those albums? That really helped me learn about Christian music. I'm like, oh, yeah, okay. So, yes, the technology was quite a bit different. We were actually playing records. There were automation systems, but they were expensive and clunky. And so we just had live DJs all day long, all night long. So you'd play a record. And somebody asked me recently, well, what was it that you liked about radio? I said, well, it was the first job I ever had where I wasn't watching the clock and the clock was moving too slowly. Because everything happens so fast in radio, you're watching the clock and it's always moving too fast. And when you're playing 3-minute records and you have to cue this one up and then you have to cue that one up and you have to put the other one away and you have to prepare what you're going to say on the radio between the records, I mean, it moves. So if you had a 4-hour radio shift, it just feel like it flew past versus a 4-hour shift of bagging groceries, which crawled.
So you mentioned Ronald Reagan, and he began his media career in radio, and there's that famous story. I don't know if it's correct or not, but anecdotal or actually factual, where he was doing a play-by-play call of a football game basically by ticker tape, and then the ticker tape stopped. So he just made it up for the rest of the time, having been a football player himself. But did you have any of those difficult times on radio where the radio technology just failed you and you had to just ad-lib or make do or
for sure,
two wires together at the same time?
Yeah, that kind of stuff happens a lot. It happens less today with the electronics and redundancy and computers. But yeah, back then, for example, I remember you'd do a ball game, you'd have to call the telephone company and have them install a phone line at the local gymnasium. And so we were the visiting team. I had a sports announcer. The sports announcer shows up and the phone company had not installed the phone line. Well,
now, this was on your Christian radio,
on
right?
the Christian, yeah, we did sports. We do sports at this station here. So I've always worked at commercial Christian stations. We never ask for money, and we've always done sports. So it's one way to be a part of the local community, and another way that people will easily sponsor and give you their money. So. Right. We're doing a basketball game. So he has like 100 feet of telephone cord with him. He plugs into the coach's telephone in the office, in the locker room. He strings it out into the runway going out to the gym, but he can only see half the court and the scoreboard. So he announces the whole game. That wasn't me doing it, but he was announcing the whole game while only seeing half the court and having to make up the rest.
Oh, my.
But, we just recently aired a softball game, the state tournament, and the FHSAA, the Florida High School Sports Association, Athletic Association, they require you to do certain announcements, some of them quite long. So we're airing this softball game. This was just recently. And we're right in the middle of announcing this long FHSAA announcement, and the game begins again. Okay, well, the guys are like, they're starting. I'm like, well, we're right in the middle of this required announcement. So then you come back, and then the announcers announce the play as if it's happening, even though it's already done. So
right.
you end up, especially when you're live, you end up doing that kind of stuff all the time.
So what change in Christian radio do you think has been the most significant for the industry of Christian radio in those 40 years?
Well, as far as the wide industry, the thing that you're seeing now, and we're not part of this here at Wave 94 in Tallahassee, but you see the growth of K-Love, for example. K-Love right now is the big dog in Christian radio in the fact that they have so many stations. And they went with a different model where they don't have, like Way FM was somewhat similar, but they had local DJs at their local radio stations. They don't do that anymore. And Way FM's owned by the Hope Media Group now anyway, so it's a whole different animal. But K-Love took up this network idea where they've got their announcers somewhere. Used to be Rockland, California. Now it's Nashville, Tennessee area. But they just have their few announcers. And I don't know, hundreds and hundreds of local radio stations all over the country. So, and they're listener supported, so they'll do a share-a-thon, or a radiothon, or whatever you want to call it, and they'll get support from all over the country. Well, that enables them to bring in lots of money, which enables them to buy more and more radio stations. I just read this week that they bought a big station in Baltimore. So it's the first time K-Love has been heard in Baltimore. And they'll do their share-a-thon or whatever. Now people from Baltimore will be giving money, so that will enable them to buy more radio stations. So what you've seen is partly because of people like Caleb. For the first time, there are more Christian radio stations, more religious is what the industry calls them, than any other radio station. For a long time, it was country, but religious radio stations passed country. So now there are more Christian stations than any other kind of radio station in the country.
So you have the spread of the gospel and Christian music that way, but you lose the local touch because it all comes out of one place.
Yes, that is true. And then that's where there's still lots of stations like our station where I sometimes refer to us as a mom and pop station, where we're not the big box store station, you might say. We're the local station. And that gives you a lot of advantages in local relationships, local advertisers, local ministries, local pastors, people that do radio ministry that aren't a pastor, all the parachurch ministries like Share Healthcare, for example. You work with a lot of people, you meet a lot of people, and God's had me on this journey all along. I get up every day, I roll out of bed, I take a knee, I point to heaven, and I say, "Reporting for duty, sir." And I try to follow the Lord's leading, of course, through scriptures, through the Holy Spirit inside of me, giving me ideas. And I just look back now, and it's just been such a blessed life. I don't know what the future holds, but I've already gotten so much more than I could, as the Bible says, ask for or even think of. It's just been a blessing, and I give God all the thanks.
Well, we mentioned or asked about what was the biggest change in the industry, but for you in these 40 years, what was the biggest change for you? I mean, obviously, Illinois to Florida, that's a big change, but perhaps that wasn't the biggest change for you.
That was huge. And here's why. Dennis Rainey used to host the show called Family Life. And he used to always ask his guests, "What's the most courageous thing you've ever done?" And you get a lot of interesting stories with that question. It's a great question to ask people. And I thought, getting married and having children was probably the most courageous thing I did, but it didn't feel courageous. Partly probably because I didn't know what all I was getting into. When you're in love and you get married, that's a huge thing, but you don't really necessarily know it at the time. But making the move from Illinois to Florida was a time where I made a big move, and I knew it was humongous. We had 4 teenagers. I knew it would change their life. It would change who they marry. It was generational change. And then we were very comfortable in Illinois, and I was actually managing 2 radio stations, one in Illinois, one in Missouri. Everything was going well at both stations. And then as I became aware of this job here, and I felt God really drawing me, pressing me like a thumb in my back, I'll say, to, hey, apply for this job, which I did, and then got it and moved here. That was 20 years ago. And so that was huge, and it was nerve-wracking, and, moving your family to a place where you don't know a soul. And
particularly when you have 4 teenagers, and that's a critical time for them.
It's a critical time. They could hate you forever if it's not done right. And yet feeling like, well, I believe this is God's will, so we're going to do it. I remember some people in Illinois saying they'll be back, and I thought, no, I don't have any sense that we'll be back. I have a sense that this is God's move, and this is He's doing this, and of course now it's ancient history, and we can look back and say, well, we know how things worked out. But yes, that was a humongous change. And for about the first 6 months or so, I really felt a lot of the pressure of it, and just managing things, and, a lot was swirling around in those days.
Well, I know you talk to a lot of young people, and what would you advise them about how to make career choices, whether to make a career in Christian radio or Christian media? What would you advise a young person today who's maybe either a graduate from high school looking to get in the workforce, or a graduate from college, or maybe a junior or senior deciding what to do when they graduate?
Well, my advice to every single person on the planet is to go into your room, shut your door, and pray to your Father. That's what Jesus said in Matthew 6:6. Or get alone, shut out the distractions, talk to God. Do this on a daily basis. Obviously, become a workman of the Word of God, the Bible. Get into the Scriptures. Become a student of the Scriptures. And the key here is that if you're a born-again, saved Christian believer, the Holy Spirit now resides in you. Jesus said that, we will be with you and we will come and dwell in you. And he said, I'll go away, I'll send my Spirit to be with you. We have God's Spirit inside of us. So we don't necessarily even have to call out to heaven for God to come down and visit us. He's here, and as a believer, he's in you. So you have this personal relationship with God. And, most Christians who've walked the walk know what I'm talking about. But that's why my advice is, because a lot of times people will say things like, well, I'm going to get up and do something for God today. And I usually say, don't do that. The Army doesn't want you to wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to do something for the Army today. No, they would. You'd probably get in trouble doing that. They want you to get up and do what you're told. And so that's my advice, is get up and do what you're told. And discerning that can be tricky, and that's where the Scriptures come in. That's where your fellow believers come in to help you to discern, how is God leading you? But I've just finished memorizing the certain parts of Romans, and it talks about we're all different parts of the body, but we have different functions. And yet it says this, individually members of one another. We each have a part, just like a soldier in the Army. You have a part. You're not the whole thing. You're one part of a huge thing, but we do need you to do your part in the huge thing, for the huge thing to work smoothly. So my advice to everybody is, get alone with God, the Matthew 6:6 principle, I call it sometimes. Get alone, shut out the distractions, talk to God, and then follow his leadership, because you might think, oh, I'm in line to do this, that, or the other, but God might have other ideas, and his ideas are always the best ideas.
So reporting for duty, sir, and do what you're told.
Do what you're told.
Well, Doug, that seems like a good note to end on. I'm glad we had this interview talking about your 40 years, doing a brief Reader's Digest summary of it, so to speak, because I learned a lot about you, and I appreciate it. I hope your audience does, too, and I hope they send you lots of anniversary cards. That'd be great. Listeners out there, you hear that?
Yes, well, you don't need to send me anything, so I'll be perfectly fine and happy.
Well, maybe a donut or two.
Well, I'm fasting donuts, so not donuts.
Oh, don't do donuts, audience. No temptations. All right. Well, thank you, Doug. Appreciate it. And appreciate all you do for us and, individually here at Share Health here, but what you do for the kingdom, because that's just going to last. Who knows what waves you've sent out there. Oh,
for sure. Biblically, we would just call them seeds. But I've also lived long enough to see seeds bear fruit, to where I can just look back and see, when you follow God's ways, he just brings life. It just brings life to your home, to your family, to your work. And, when there's life, when it's green and it's fruitful, it's just a beautiful thing.
Yeah. Well, I thank you that I've gotten to know you as a fruitful person. You're a good influence.
Well, I'm very glad to know you, and I guess we should end by reminding people that there is such a thing as Share Healthcare, since that was kind of the purpose of me talking to you today. And I'll just tell people that Share Healthcare is a nonprofit healthcare sharing ministry. You might call it a health insurance alternative for Christians. We won't tell you all about it now, but you can check it out at sharehealthcare.com. Just look up sharehealthcare.com and you can get all the details. That's Mike Sharman. He's with Share Healthcare. And for Wave 94, I'm Doug Apple.